Welcome to Family Health by Mini First Aid. Mini First Aid are the UK's leading family first aid provider, and we are delighted to bring our latest podcast series to you, giving you all the information that you need around family health subjects. Thanks for joining. Series 3 of the Family Health podcast is sponsored by Savlon Scar Prevention Gel. Savlon Scar Prevention Gel speeds up healing, helps soothe pain, and reduces the likelihood of scarring when used on minor wounds, superficial burns, and grazes. And to be frank, with my 6 children in my house, cuts, scrapes, and grazes are plentiful. So my first aid kit, saviour, is Savlon Scar Prevention Gel. Hi folks, I'm Kate and I am the founder of Mini First Aid, and I am also your family health podcast host for today. We are absolutely delighted that you've taken the time to listen to our podcast, whether you're in the car, perhaps you're cleaning your house, or maybe you've got a result and you've scored yourself a bit of time to sit down with a cuppa. Whatever it is that you're doing right now, our family health podcast covers a huge range of topics that might just affect one of your family members. And if you've ever got a family health concern and are thinking, I'm going to Google it, please don't Google it. Listen to our podcast instead, where you will find a wealth of information. So today, I'm thrilled to announce our guests this week, Olivia Bowden and Pernille Yilman. Olivia and Pernille are going to be discussing eating disorders with us. It's a huge worry topic for many parents out there. Even if your son or daughter isn't suffering themselves, it may be that you want to be prepared, or perhaps you want to support another family member or friend going through a difficult time. Ladies, thank you for agreeing to come and speak to us for this really important episode. So welcome.
Thank you so much.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah,
hi.
thank you. Hi.
Right. Guys, first up, Olivia, Pernille, just tell us a little bit about yourselves and what do you do?
Pernille, do you want to go first?
Sure.
Go for it, Pernille. Let's hear from you.
Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be here today. And I have to preface everything with saying that caregivers, parents, family members are some of my favorite people to talk to. So I'm particularly delighted to be on this podcast.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. I'm a neuroscientist by training, and I have over a decade of academic research experience within the field of brain development and sensory functions. A few years ago, I left the university towers, however, and around a year ago, well, a bit over actually now, I founded a nonprofit organization called MindBlossom that is focused on bringing mental health education to the public. I want to mention that I also serve as a consultant and advisor to companies and various research groups and organizations, and I write occasionally for Psychology Today. And relevant to the conversation that we're having today, I had an eating disorder from the age of 11 until my mid-20s. I'm now fully recovered, and a big part of my passion in starting MindBlossom was to help ensure that other children or youth and adults would not have to live through the same experience. So that's it from me.
Pernille, welcome. Thank you. I should share my daughter is 11, and just even you saying your age made me have this huge intake of breath. I can't wait to chat to you. Olivia, tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Olivia Bowden. I'm coach and founder of bodyimagecoach.co.uk, and that's for teenagers going through eating disorders and body dysmorphic disorder. Also author of several self-help books, including a title, I Hate the Way I Look, and founder of Dear Heart Column, which is a free self-help platform available for everybody on the internet. So that's me.
Olivia, fantastic. And what I will say to our listeners is all of the organisations that the ladies have mentioned and any signposting that they do today will all be in the show notes. So we'll be able to make sure that you can pick up on those references as we go through today. So I am very conscious that there will be parents, caregivers listening going, well, my child's eating fine. They're too young to have an eating disorder. Why do you think every parent and carer out there, considering whether they're going to continue listening to this podcast, should listen up now for our podcast?
Yeah, I'll answer that if that's okay. So, eating disorders are not always easy to spot, and children as young as 6 years old have been diagnosed with an eating disorder. So, typically, what we do is we need the signs to hit us in the face before we recognise that there's a problem, such as extreme and rapid weight loss or weight gain. But what about the more subtle signs, such as secretly counting calories, excessive exercising, or things like mood swings, which, we might just put down to being a teenager. So it's good to have an awareness of eating disorders and how they show up in your child and what you can do to spot the signs.
That's fascinating. Go for it.
Yeah. Sorry. So a person can have a lot of shame and guilt around eating disorders. So it's really good to tune into your child's habits and see if they have a healthy relationship or not with food. And also keep an eye out for the language of themselves. So do they criticise themselves for looking a certain way or eating too much, or are they spending too much time focusing on their body and how it should look? And also it's important to think about your own habits as a parent. Do you yo-yo diet, for example, which is something I was brought up around when I was a child, and then I'm not saying that caused me to have an eating disorder and BDD, but I did develop both, and I think that was a trigger. Also, do you talk negatively about your own body in front of your child? Do you look in the mirror a lot, or do you have a lot of mirrors in the home? Because when we think about an eating disorder, we mainly think about anorexia, like the person that looks too thin. But what about binge eating disorder, where a person is eating too much, or bulimia, where a person will purge in secret through vomiting or laxatives or excessive exercise? Or what if your child only eats one type of food that doesn't give them the nutritional value that they need? Children are really good at hiding what they don't want us to see. So this is really good for awareness, and I think awareness is key.
So everybody is now staying well and truly in tune for our conversation. I'm absolutely sure of it. Can I ask you, ladies, can anyone be affected by an eating disorder?
Yes.
Yeah, they can. Okay, yeah, they can. Yeah. Okay. And are there any statistics as to how many are suffering with eating disorders in the UK right now?
Yeah. So I want to say it one more time. Anyone can experience an eating disorder, and it cannot be underscored how important it is to talk about this. Mm-hmm. We often assume that girls are the only ones affected, but boys are too. And this classic stereotype that a lot of people have of being a white adolescent girl from an affluent family is the one with an eating disorder is totally incorrect. When we dig into some of the newest statistics that are existing on a global level as well as in many different Western countries, they find that around 8% of females will experience an eating disorder in their lifetime. And I want to really stress that number. 8% might not sound like that many, but for a very long time, for many decades, the research was suggesting that only around 2% of females would experience eating disorders. And so this just goes to show that these statistics have really been underreported. If we look at the male statistics, which were thought to be under 1% for a long time, the newer statistics are coming out showing that around 4% of males will experience an eating disorder in their lifetime. So that's just the gender difference, right? Where we're looking at males versus females. If we then start zooming in on people of color in larger bodies or in the LGBTQ community, they're even more likely to experience an eating disorder. So everyone is truly affected, and these statistics are continuously being updated, thankfully.
Gosh. Now, Olivia, you talked about the different types, and that perhaps people think of just anorexia, and there are different types of eating disorder, and you've suffered with one yourself, Olivia. Can you share us a little bit about what happened in your personal experience?
Yeah, sure. So I had ARFID and purging disorder, and it was actually after giving birth to my child that it started. So I was aged 19, and at that time I was afraid that my partner would leave me because I'd put extra weight on. So I thought in my mind that eating just dry bran flakes and nothing else. Don't ask me why I got that notion, but I thought that would help me to lose weight. And as well as this, I just started taking laxatives. So I was literally just eating dry bran flakes and laxatives every day. And I had no knowledge of what I was really doing to myself because the internet wasn't around back then. So I just had this idea that doing these two things are going to make me lose weight and then I can keep my partner. It lasted around a year and I became really, really ill, which kind of happened overnight, to be honest. Like, for a year I was fine. I was doing what I was doing. And then all of a sudden my body just decided to stop. So my period stopped first of all, and then I was blacking out every time I stood up. I became bedridden for a whole year, which caused depression, suicidal thoughts. I remember spending my 21st birthday in bed, and I was too ill to look after my newborn child. And it was, I guess the funny thing was that my GP didn't pick up that it was an eating disorder. So no one asked me about my diet, as everyone was looking at the symptoms rather than the cause. And this happens a lot with eating disorders, that it's misdiagnosed. So it wasn't until years later when I started to learn about eating disorders that I realised that I had ARFID and purging disorder. So after a whole year of being ill, I started to make a very slow recovery. And the reason for that was my depression felt bigger than the desire to be thin. And so I focused all of my efforts on finding ways to feel better and not feel so suicidal. And I started to eat, and I never went down that path again. But it did take 4 years to get my period back. So you can kind of see the damage that it does to you, you know, to your body. And because we're not educated about it, we don't realise what we're doing to ourselves. And the other thing, I guess, from that is I have a very sensitive stomach now, and I get a lot of pain in my arms and my hands quite easily if I use them too much. Or I guess maybe that's just my age now, I don't know. But yeah, it was a dark place. It was a dark path.
Yes, I mean, and so you'd had a baby, and so your motivation was your partner or wanting to maintain your partner. And you said that the healthcare professionals were looking at the symptoms. And so were you seeing people related to your baby as well? So health visitors and midwives and things that were not picking up on what was going on?
Yeah, I didn't really have much support, to be honest. We're talking about 30 years ago, so it was a long time ago. And it's almost like I've blocked it out of my mind as well, to be honest, because it felt like another life, because I was thinking so differently to how I think and feel about myself now. But nobody picked up on it. And to be honest, the first year after having my child, I was okay. That was the year that I was eating the dry bran flakes and taking the laxatives, and I was doing quite well. And my body was probably surviving on what it could because there was nothing else to survive on. And then, so yet on the outside looking in, it looked like I was a normal mother doing, you know, eating properly. I wasn't losing that much weight, which was the weird thing. Like I didn't go stick thin, but I did lose enough weight for me to start to feel like this is a good thing. Okay. So that reinforces that, you know, that reward, you know, because when we do stuff, we either want a reward or a reason for doing it. And that fulfilled both. The reason was I want to be thinner. The reward was I am thinner. And that gives you like a power trip. And that happens a lot I know Pernille is nodding, that happens a lot with eating disorders. And so, it didn't get picked up by anybody, even me. I didn't realise what I was doing to myself, so...
Pernille, have you got anything to add here from Olivia's experience?
Yeah, I think she's mentioning a lot of the important considerations that go into what we know and don't know about eating disorders. And so I'm hearing a bunch of the triggers that we know from research are very common to trigger the onset of an eating disorder, but we still have such a dearth of research that's going into it that we don't have the full picture. But dieting, growing up in that household, the postpartum period is actually a time where females are also more likely to experience an eating disorder, which is highly underreported. And the aspects of seeing it as a coping mechanism, which Olivia was mentioning as well. I'm going to try to lose weight, so I'll make sure that my partner will stick to me. That type of mindset of utilizing the eating disorder as a tool for a goal is also very common. And then over time, that eating disorder really take over. And we see that in so many different individuals, but so often Olivia's story, although it may predate many of the young lives that are affected today, they have a similar story.
Sure. Thank you, Olivia. With your experience, led you to want to help other people, young people experiencing eating disorders. Do you feel your lived experience has helped you have a better understanding for the work that you're now doing?
Yeah, I'm very passionate about helping teens, and sometimes I can be a mentor as well as a coach. So because I've got lived experience, some of my clients ask me that are interested in my journey with ARFID, and they ask me questions that they couldn't really ask anybody else. So it's really good that I can talk about my symptoms and my feelings without talking about my behaviours. So I make a real point of never talking about my behaviours, because that can also reinforce their behaviours or give them new ideas. So it's it's a very, there's a very fine line, and I am aware of that. But I'm able to talk about how I felt, how I coped, how I got through it. And these are all positive things. And also what happens is when you talk about your symptoms and feelings, it helps the client to feel validated. And when someone feels validated, then it strengthens the bond, and then the healing can be greater because of that bond strengthening.
That's fascinating. And this actually leads me on perfectly to my next question, which I had for you, which is about, and this is probably impossible to answer in just a couple of moments in a podcast, but if a young person is thinking or feeling or having feelings that would lead to an eating disorder, what are those feelings or things, what things are going to be happening for a young person that might lead them to have an eating disorder?
Yeah, you're right. That is a very difficult question to answer in a few minutes. And I don't even know if I could do justice to this question if I had a full hour. Because the point is that there's so many different ways of ending up there. And that's a little bit scary. But I'll take myself as an example, and we can also be inspired by Olivia's story. As I mentioned earlier, I was 11 years old when I started developing disordered eating. And at that time, I was really sad at home. My mother and stepfather argued a lot, and my mother was very unpredictable. In parallel, my father's household was very unwelcoming and threatening. And so I really felt like I didn't fit in, and I was really scared of not being loved. On top of that, I also started developing suicidal thoughts, and I made very concrete plans on how to end my life. I'm 11. So
11. Oh my God.
Yeah, if you haven't guessed yet, I was depressed. So I stopped eating in large part because I was depressed. There was not really any specific thoughts behind it. I wasn't thinking about that I wanted to be thin and that I wanted to be a model. These were not the thoughts that were triggering that behavior. It's common that children, just like adults, will experience changes in their appetite when they're depressed. And sometimes that means they don't feel like eating. Often we focus on the opposite end, that people overeat when they're sad. But several people, and in particular children, are likely to experience a lack of appetite. So I would skip my breakfast, throughout my lunch, ate minimally at dinner, and no parent noticed anything, which is remarkable. But the problem is that over time, that became a habit. And so that became my coping mechanism, that became how I did it. Now, it didn't help that I also had a lot of negative influences, just like Olivia, who grew up in a very diet-focused household. I grew up in a household where dieting and eating minimally was some behaviors that my mother was modeling. And in the after-school program I was in, my major role model was very thin and actually taught me to think about calories and worry about them too. So, there are a bunch of different factors, but what I'm trying to say here is there was not a particular vision about myself becoming skinny and a model. That wasn't there. It was really a coping mechanism to the situation that I was in. So the thoughts were more about sadness. Now, interestingly, and long story short, I spontaneously recovered at 13 because my life circumstances changed. And it really was almost from day 100 to day 0 that I went from an eating disorder to not having an eating disorder. But it goes to show that sometimes eating disorders are really a response to the situation that you're in. Now, if we fast forward to my 16-year-old self, I was back in a similar situation as above. And I would say that I was incredibly miserable. And at that time, however, my thoughts were more explicit. So I actually thought to myself, I want people to see my bones so they can see that I need help. At that point, I was definitely more focused on trying to be skinny so that I could get other people to see me. It was really a cry for help. But over time, again, it also became this safety behavior, like a coping mechanism. And it also meant that the moment that I felt threatened, that I couldn't get to do my daily extreme exercise, or I was forced to eat breakfast, that would get me really scared. And so I clung on to the eating disorder as something that gave me stability in life. Yes, those are some of the thoughts that really go into that process. But it's really about trying to survive in many of these cases.
And different thoughts, presumably for different individuals, as to what drives them towards an eating disorder. Okay.
Yeah.
What else, perhaps Olivia, you might be able to share this, what else might be going on in a young person's mind that might drive them towards an eating disorder?
Yeah, so when you have an eating disorder, you usually have a very distorted view of how you look. And also the eating disorder is the end result of a manifestation of beliefs and habits. So because it doesn't happen overnight, so in someone's mind at the stage of an eating disorder, they may have intrusive thoughts, say, every 6 to 10 seconds. So thoughts like, I look too fat, I'm disgusting, don't eat today, no one will like me like this, and so on. Their behaviours may look like purging, calorie counting, isolating themselves or self-harming, and so on. So all of this is a form to try and feel better and get away from their thoughts. And if you put it another way, and this is how I explain it to clients as well, if we think of a car at the top of a steep hill, at the top of the hill, the car is still, and as we start to push it over the edge, it will start rolling down. And the more it rolls, the faster it gets until it's unable to stop. And this is because the momentum has become faster and faster. And this is how the mind works. So we start with one thought that manifests into more thoughts, which in turn turn into beliefs and behaviours and habits. So imagine trying to stop the car that's coming down that hill. The car is, if someone with an eating disorder, the car is speeding down that hill and they're at the point of a very painful struggle. So they don't know how to stop the thoughts. And this is why it's so hard to heal, but it is possible. And we just need to look at the thoughts rather than slowing them, trying to stop them. We just need to slow them down gradually. But usually when those are some of the things that are going on in someone's mind, but also it's more about the momentum has just become so, an eating disorder is an accumulation of months and months and months of worry and destructive behaviours and habits. It's not like an overnight thing.
Right. Okay. So you talked about at the front end of the podcast, you talked about that children are good at hiding things. And as a parent, speaking personally as well as a parent, and my own worries that we do for our children and wanting to do the best for our children, there will be people listening going, right, so what am I looking for? What are the signs? You know, what can parents be on an alert for eating disorders with their children?
Yeah, there's so many.
Okay.
And too many for me to mention here. But some of those key behaviors include changes in appetite, changes in exercise habits, changes in clothes they're wearing, and changes in their hobbies. Now, any of these items can happen naturally, so it's of course super important to keep track of how they're changing and understand the underlying motivation, right? So if you see, for example, that your kid is suddenly obsessing over their looks, they're looking at themselves in the mirror all the time, they're counting their calories, that's an obvious sign that something's going on. Ideally, you have intervened before that, but sometimes that's not the case, right? And a lot of these types of behaviors, they learn in school. So don't blame yourself. That would be my biggest suggestion here as a parent. Be honest in trying to look out for those early signs, and don't let guilt or shame stop you in providing the support that they need. Because sometimes these signs can be more subtle, as Olivia mentioned as well. That could be they seem sad, even depressed, maybe super anxious. Maybe they say they're less hungry. That's what I said. I said, well, I just don't feel like eating. And suddenly it became okay that I didn't eat, right? That was a warning sign that my parents could have picked up on, instead of me having a stalled growth 2 years down the line. And that's really where you catch it and avoid it early on. Yeah.
So with parents that may pick up on a warning sign, where do parents go for help? Where's the next stop if you suspect or you see these warning signs in your children?
Yeah, if you see a problem and if your child is vocal about their appearance, rather than offering solutions, stop and validate. So it's really important that we don't offer solutions, because it's natural to us, isn't it? We want to offer solutions to everybody. Yeah, we want to fix everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we can't offer solutions, because your solution is not their solution. Your solution is completely different to their solution, so they're not going to listen to it anyway. But it's really good to think about options rather than solutions. So if your child says things like, I look fat, my belly sticks out, I hate my body, then maybe you could say something like, I'm really sorry that you feel this way. I can see how upset you are, and it must be very difficult to have these feelings. Can we talk about that? So notice here that we're not responding, we're not reacting, we are validating their feelings, because that's what they are seeking. They want you to validate them and say, it's okay to have these feelings. They don't want you to say, have you tried doing this? Have you tried doing that? Also, don't tell them that they are skinny or masculine or beautiful or handsome, because when you say things like that, what you're doing is you're giving them a false reality of what they should be looking like. So rather than saying things like, you know, you're perfect, you look perfectly skinny or whatever, say things like, your body and face is completely natural and unique to you, and everybody loves you how you look now. Because what they really want is to know that they fit in, that they are accepted, and that they feel safe. And even though from the outside looking in, you might think that they do feel safe, but if they're not, this is one of the reasons why it's coming out, because they're not feeling safe in how they look. So also, if you're open to being able to explore with your child, ask them questions, get curious, like, how do you want to look? What would looking differently give you? And are your expectations of yourself realistic? It's really important to try and ask questions rather than offer the solutions. And I know I've said that a few times now, but it's really, don't go down the solution route.
Sure.
Also, if your child is able to speak to you about it, think about giving them multiple options so that they feel more in control. So, for example, a multiple option could be, why don't we both start a healthy routine together? Why don't we look at some books that you can buy about how to accept your body? Or why don't we look at getting some support? And that out of those three options, hopefully the child will think, okay, I can pick one of those. I don't have to pick any, but I can pick one. So it's all about asking questions rather than solutions. But ultimately, if you feel like your child is not safe, you must visit your GP or CAMS or call 111 or go to A&E if you feel your child's not safe.
Okay. I was going to ask you that actually about, so where you talked about the three options, and if a child says to their parent or carer, yeah, I want some support. Yeah, I want to talk to somebody. I want to get some support. You mentioned going to the GP there, and obviously if you feel that your child is in harm, that you might seek emergency help. But where does the support come from? What organisations, where are we going as parents to get that support for our children?
Yeah, I mean, if it's through the NHS, then it starts with your GP, or you can make a self-referral through IEPS. Obviously, this is in the UK. For Pernille, it'll be completely different. If you want to go down the private route, then we do offer body image programs for eating disorders and body dysmorphic disorder. That's at bodyimagecoach.co.uk. If you want to get educated about eating disorders, then that would be Pernille at mindblossom.org. And both of our organisations are online. So that's the private routes. It depends on which route you want to take, but there are options. There's always options.
Okay.
And if you're interested, we can certainly give you more information on that, both of us.
Brilliant. That's great. Really helpful. And we'll make sure that all those signposts are in our show notes from today's podcast. I'm sure, or I've heard anecdotally in conversation with people, that sometimes young people don't want to accept help. So perhaps they don't see it as an issue or a challenge, and that their parent or caregiver is wanting to know what can they do. What would you give advice-wise if a young person doesn't want to accept help or support?
Yeah, that's really common, first off.
Okay.
And there are various reasons for why somebody might have that way of thinking. As a young person, you may not want help because of stigma and shame that Olivia mentioned earlier. That's very common. Often, and I was one of those people, is that they don't want to get rid of it. At one point, they feel identified with their eating disorder. It becomes a part of who they are, and it's truly their coping mechanism. This is the way they navigate life. If they have a skinny body or their body looks a certain way, that is what makes them move through all of life's hurdles. So they don't want to get rid of it. And that's really difficult when you get to that point. Like going back to the analogy that Olivia was mentioning with the running car and the momentum, that's really, really holds true for how people cling on to that eating disorder as their safety behavior. Now, there are, of course, other reasons too. It could be that they would like to receive treatment, but they don't know that they even need treatment. They may not know that it's a disorder. I interview a lot of people with eating disorders, and what I hear them say often is, I didn't know this is what was going on with me. Olivia mentioned it too. I didn't realize I had an eating disorder. And then there are other people where they'll say, well, I know I have an eating disorder, or unhealthy thoughts in this area, but I can't access treatment. So maybe my GP is not letting me go to getting a referral to a provider. This is very common and something that we're really trying to change through education. Could also be that there are wait lists that are backed up so long that you have to wait 3 months before you get any support. And then, of course, the private routes, if you don't know about them, then it's really difficult to even know what to Google, if you end up Googling. But guys, don't Google. Just listen here.
Please don't.
I want to, if I can, I would love to mention one more thing, which ties back to what Olivia was saying earlier. As I mentioned, I'm a neuroscientist, so the brain is always fascinating to me, and all of the education that we do at MindBlossom is really rooted in science. What we know about eating disorders is that their brains look really similar to people that have obsessive compulsive disorder or OCD. And so this element of anxiety and this element of these compulsory behaviors where they keep having to do something, right? So OCD, we often think about somebody who keeps having to check if the door is locked. Now, somebody with an eating disorder, that can be, I need to keep checking that I look all right, that my face is okay. I had a habit of constantly pinching my ribs or the skin around my ribs. And the more I could feel my ribs, the happier I would feel, right? So these are some of the elements, too, that go into not just defining what the disorder looks like, but also defining the barriers, those intrinsic elements within yourself where the eating disorder really becomes a part of you. So a lot of therapy will also be about de-identifying with your eating disorder and saying, I am not this disorder. This disorder is something that lives outside of me. It's not a part of who I am, and people love me without it.
So, Pernille, you talked about your profession in neuroscience. Is there more research now in science and technology to help us with treatment of eating disorder, to inform us more about it? I'm watching Pernille's facial expression at this point, and if you're not watching, then you won't
so
see it. But she just sort of went,
She went,
come on, right. So tell me what's happening. Tell me what's happening. What's going on in science and research?
Very little is the honest answer.
Very little.
We have this course, a 12-hour virtual or pre-recorded course for eating disorders, and we have a session specifically on the neuroscience, and I start that session with talking about why there's not much to talk about here, or why there's so much, because there's so many open-ended questions. And some of the problems is that there's just not enough research funding that's being poured into eating disorder research. So the researchers that are out there don't even have the money to do it. And then, of course, we have the stigma that's kind of driving that continued lack of funding, right? So there's a lot of work that's being done at the level of government lobbying and policy making, where people are really trying to change this. So that's really good. Now, it's not all bad. There are some things that are happening, but they're just not as impressive in the field of eating disorders as they are in the field of anxiety, for example, right? Okay. Which is okay, because often eating disorders and anxieties overlap. So you can benefit from what they have learned in anxieties, but things like AI chatbots, the role of remote sensing through biosensors are some of the big leaps that are being done today. And so just to take a step back here, AI chatbots are AI-driven conversations with a chatbot. We typically do that when we are on Amazon and we're saying like, hey, I have a problem with my order. Now companies are starting to offer solutions for people that have mental health problems. Now there's a huge amount of cons to utilizing this, but it can be an option for people that really need some help acutely in the moment, or for people that don't want to talk to a therapist for whatever that reason may be.
Gosh.
Right now, unfortunately, there's just really a limit on the amount of research that's out there. So I can't, talking about the new technology that's identifying eating disorders earlier or improved treatments is pretty minimal.
Okay. But Olivia, have you got anything to add around, I guess, your own research that you've done that's sort of driven the work that you do, or any extra thoughts on what's been happening in the support of diagnosis of eating disorders?
I haven't, to be honest.
Right.
Like I learn more. The more that I support clients, the more I learn about eating disorders, because everybody has a different journey. So it's more of an experienced point of view, if that makes sense. So each client comes with their own different set of problems with the eating disorder, and no two people are the same. So I'm learning. I learn from clients a lot, and I think it's more complex than we actually really think it is, and it'll be more complex than I think it is as I move along. Sure. The more I learn, the more I realise I don't know I don't know as much as I thought I knew, if that makes sense. But yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot out there, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of unknown nervousness for parents. What if? Some questions. I think it's been really helpful when you've talked about some of the things that you might be able to spot or signs, and some of those initial conversations and providing options for your children, I think is brilliant. And I think today's conversation has been just a real help for parents just to understand a little bit more. And also the fact that, Pernille, you were talking about those stats, and actually 8% versus 2%. And actually, if you look at your child's classroom and you go 8% of the children in that classroom, and then suddenly when you see it stood in human bodies, you go, wow, that's a number for every child's class in school. And then I think that's me, a very visual person, that's really, so I think it's so crucial that we've had this conversation today. Ladies, I'd like to ask you, and we always ask our guests when they come onto the Family Health Podcast, to share their sort of final thought. If you hadn't absorbed everything from our conversation, but you did want us to take away one final thought, what would you want people to take away, parents take away, that are listening today? Going first.
Do you want to go first, Pernille?
Go on, Pernille. Go for it, Pernille.
I'll be happy to. I think as a parent right now, the best thing you can do is to educate yourself.
Great.
Get to know the signs. And this, of course, extends beyond eating disorders. As I mentioned, eating disorders often overlap with feeling anxiety, depression. So as you're educating yourself on one disorder, you're immediately educating yourself for some of the warning signs of the other. And so getting that language and getting that literacy is really important. And I would like to add on to that recovery, even if you're in the midst of having a really severe eating disorder right now, or your child does, recovery is possible.
Okay, great.
Around 45% of people with an eating disorder will eventually recover completely. And so it's all about just trying to intervene earlier and prevent. We know that parents on average wait around 8 years before they seek treatment for their child's mental health symptoms.
Right.
Now, that is absurd to think about, right? Mm-hmm. And so I would love for us to change that statistic. And I really encourage all parents to seek help earlier rather than later. And the first step will be to educate yourself. Even if the science out there is not as impressive as we would like it to be, as you just heard me say, you can still get to know what those early warning signs are and what those first steps of, okay, then what do we do now? That is a mindset that's really empowering to have as a parent.
Pernille, thank you. And we'll signpost everyone at the end of this podcast via the show notes. Olivia, how about you? What would you like everyone to take away from today's podcast?
Yeah, pretty similar, to be honest. Early intervention is key, along with educating the mind and looking for other factors in one's life. So, stress is a big cause of eating disorders. So usually with an eating disorder, there's an underlying reason that generates the eating disorder. So things like exams, bullying, not having any friends, things like that. So don't just look at the eating disorder symptoms, but things that are surrounding it too. Because if someone's going through a difficult time, it can trigger an eating disorder.
Great. Okay, that's really helpful, ladies. And I certainly am absolutely intrigued to go and read more. But I think your advice today has been really, really helpful on what is frankly quite a difficult conversation to have. So thank you so much for joining us on the Family Health Podcast. And folks, I hope you have enjoyed listening to today's podcast and found it helpful. If there are other family health related subjects that you would like us to cover, please do stay in touch with Family Health. We love to hear from our listeners, and that very much steers our guests for what you want to listen to on your Family Health Podcast. Please make sure that you subscribe to the podcast. You can do that via your podcast channels. That means that each episode will drop into your playlist. And you can also subscribe to Mini First Aid across all socials, which will give you ongoing family health advice and also notify you when the podcasts are coming and what subjects we're going to be covering. So thank you so much again for listening. You've been listening to Family Health by Mini First Aid. Thank you for listening to Family Health by Mini First Aid. I hope you found our podcast really useful and informative. If you want to know more about Mini First Aid classes, courses, qualification courses or first aid supplies, please do visit minifirstaid.co.uk or look us up on all your favourite social platforms at Mini First Aid. I take Savlon Scar Prevention Gel everywhere with me so that I am always prepared for the many little and sometimes bigger accidents that my kids encounter. Thank you again to Savlon Scar Prevention Gel for sponsoring Series 3 of the Family Health Podcast.